and we can rewire who we are and our beliefs, how we behave at any time. So I think that old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is wrong. It's untrue. So I think it's really driven by individually, does the person have a desire to shift and be different?
Welcome back to the Take Two podcast. And today we have another amazing guest joining us, Ritu Bhasin. And for those of you who don't know Ritu, she is an international renowned DEI expert, former lawyer, award-winning speaker, best-selling author, and she is about to release her newest book, We Got This: Unlocking the Beauty to Belonging. She has an amazing story in terms of how and why she got connected to the work she is doing, because she was a child of working class immigrants of color. So she shares about the experiences of bullying and feeling ashamed of her culture, but also the struggle she had and journey she took in order to just belong. And, whether you are of a different race or religion, or you're a nonconformist or the oddball out or the edgy one, that's what I used to get referred to as, or maybe the one with the newest and greatest ideas, or even the youngest one at the executive table. I think we all have an experience at some point where we feel insecure and we question our self-worth. And that might be in relationships, in the workplace, in the environment that we're in. So I really encourage you to listen to this episode because it walks you through the journey of belonging and how to find your own belonging. We connected at such a deep level with Ritu around social constructs and conditioning in today's episode. And with Rick is serving as an executive in Fortune 50 companies for many years now, we really wanted to deep dive into the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, given the work that she has done with thousands of organizations around the world in this space. We feel it's become a bit of a buzzword because everybody talks about it. Every company is putting practices in place around it or taking initiative around it. But we really question how much everybody really gets and understands what they're talking about when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have a discourse around this. So as a listener, you yourself can think about the way that you relate to DEI. We talk about everything from unlocking excellence to creating a safe and diverse place for all people and all ideas, and how that relates to performance, not just at an individual level, but an organizational level. We hope that you enjoy today's episode with Ritu Bhasin, and remember to subscribe to our podcast if you're not already. Let's take two.
Love for you to actually share with us to open this up. What is your superpower, Ritu? My superpower. Oh, that is a great question. Brooke, I don't think I've ever been asked that before. What is my superpower? I have two superpowers. One, I can fall asleep anywhere, okay, on command. Like I could literally, which probably speaks to being sleep deprived. And that is a discussion for another day. But I think that my real superpower would be that I can deeply feel people's energy. And when I say feel people's energy or sense their energy, I don't mean that, when I see a pink hue around you or a green hue around you. I mean that I can sense in my body energetic shifts when I'm speaking to people, or even when I walk into a room and I sit with someone or I'm sitting next to someone. I can feel a vibration in my body. And as you know, we are all communicating all day long verbally. We also communicate non-verbally, but I also deeply believe that we communicate energetically. Like our bodies, we know this, like our neurons are firing at others. And I am really adept at picking that up. And so what that means is that sometimes people are saying something verbally. Non-verbally, they may be neutral, but their energy is saying something different. And I can pick up on that. And the reason I feel that it's a superpower is because it has helped me to develop really deep and meaningful connections with people very, very quickly. It helps in the coaching work I've done with all of the executives, professionals I've worked with. It helps when I'm speaking on stages or staring at a green light, webinaring. because energetically I can feel what's happening with the audience and I know when to shift. It's helped in personal relationships, connecting with clients in myriad ways. I can pick up what's actually happening in their souls. And so I used to think that everyone could do this. You know, one of the things that I've learned through my leadership work, through my empowerment inclusion work, is that oftentimes as people, what we're good at, we assume that everyone else is good at. And what we're bad at, I'm putting this in quotes for people who are listening, is there any such thing as being bad? Things that we feel like we're not really good at, everyone else is really good at those things. And it's taken me a while to realize, no, I have special gifts. We all have special gifts that are unique and individual. And I would say this is probably my superpower.
I absolutely love that because I'm a deep feeler. And just a quick question, and then we'll move on from that. But would you say that you've always had that? Or do you think, I know that you went to India for some time to study the practice of yoga. Do you think that came as a result of the studies you were doing and the practice that you had? Or was that something that was like innately there from the beginning?
It was innately there from the beginning. But I'll say this. I think that in Canadian, I say Canada because I live in Canada, Canadian, American, British, so Anglo-rooted cultures, there is a high emphasis on being analytical and being left brain focused and thinking our way through things. And so my parents are from India. They're immigrants to Canada. They came now over 50 years ago. And in my culture, coming from India, we place a heavy emphasis on the spirit and the soul and energy. And I grew up in this bicultural household experience where actually there was a lot of tension for me, tugging between white Canadian Anglo-rooted culture and the Indian spirituality and way of life. And so I think for so long, I resisted when I was young, the tapping into the spirit or my energetic skill, my superpower, because I was conditioned by the education system and everything around me to be a thinker and not a feeler. And what's fascinating, I used to be a lawyer. And when I was working at my law firm, I did the Myers-Briggs personality assessment.
Oh.
And I teetered between being a T and an F, a thinker and a feeler. And years later, when I left the legal profession, launched my own DEI consulting firm, I did Myers-Briggs again. And sure enough, I turned out to be a ragingly high feeler. And so I am a feeler. I just think that I resisted it because of the social construct that we live in.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think it'd be great for you to deep dive into social construct. And you use the word conditioning. You know, obviously being in South Africa, in Cape Town, it's an amazingly beautiful place. And there's lots of deep race dynamics that exist for us here, right? So we have this conversation on a regular basis. Is like people are so conditioned to the certain conversations or the way they view people or biases of people, and sometimes unconsciously so. Can you talk a little bit about social constructs and what it means to be conditioned inside of an environment or a culture or a belief?
Yes, absolutely. The question always comes up. When we come into the world, are we already concrete in terms of our personality, our behaviors? Is it environment? Is it genetics, like nurture versus nature? Like this conversation raged 20, 30 years ago. And I think we're now in a place where we understand that, yes, nature, our genetics, there are certain things that are innate in us. However, social conditioning, which means the coaching, guidance, the direct, indirect instructions and directions we receive from our elders and messages through media and all systems that exist in society, education, healthcare, legal, are constantly shaping us. Like, so we're like plasticine, if you will. We have a form that we're born into the world. In my new book, We've Got This, I talk about how we come into the world like a clay ready to be molded. And that molding happens through all of what our elders teach us and what these systems like our schools and our doctors and journalists teach us. And so social conditioning has a profound impact on who we are. In fact, we know from some of the cultural competence studies that by the age of 3, we have already absorbed many ways of communicating from those who are around us, or our elders who are shaping us. And so social constructs are everything, or social conditioning, the molding that happens that influences how we turn out to be as adults, is profound. And this is profound both in terms of our experiences with forms of oppression like racism, whether that's in society or in the workplace. And it also has a profound impact on us as it relates to, on an individual level, our self-esteem and our self-confidence and our self-worth. And I share both of these buckets. So like social systems or structures like racism, sexism, like misogyny, homophobia, and other forms of oppression, and individual experiences around social conditioning. I share both of these because when I think about my own struggles and journey to belong, and the deep, deep seated feelings of insecurity and lack of self-worth that I experienced as a child, as a teenager, and into my 20s, those feelings were individual because I had these experiences with bullying and cultural confusion growing up, like in a household where my parents were Indian immigrants, new to the country, struggling with their own identities, and then being thrust into this world of whiteness. They were individual for me, but then I also got all these messages from the media and all the systems around me. And so both can have a profound impact on our conditioning and impact who we are and how we show up in the world.
You know, I grew up in South Africa. I left South Africa 17 years ago, but I was brought up through apartheid. So I've got a totally different view on how that's experienced, and I've got friends on all sides of this. And I think what you're saying is so profound because it's also multi-generational, you know. So I look at different generations and I see how stuck the older generation is with years and decades of conditioning. And then you see the younger generation, you know, somewhere in between that have kind of broken out of that, because I was part of that fighting apartheid in my late teens, early 20s. There's a different understanding of it. And then you look at the younger generation again, and it's again like the older generation. It's actually so concerning. You know, you see this deep-seated ideas that have been so fixated in younger kids. We need to solve this. And I just wonder, when something has been conditioned for so long, is it possible to undo that conditioning? And I look at my mom and dad, beautiful people, amazing. My mom's the most loving person in the world, but it's so deep-seated. I do not understand I personally don't believe it's possible to undo that after like 70 years of conditioning. Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, you know, that is such a great insight. I deeply believe, and the science tells us, our brains are plastic and we can rewire who we are and our beliefs, how we behave at any time. So I think that old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is wrong. It's untrue. If the old dog wants to change. And so isn't this the key thing that in my new book, We've Got This, which is a book on belonging, I talk a lot about the power of choice and the choices we make around who we want to be and how we want to live. And as you know, when we anchor to the outcome we seek and the change we want in our life, we're more likely to shift behavior. So I think it's really driven by individually, does the person have a desire to shift and be different? I can tell you with my own experience as it relates to feeling deeply unworthy, I didn't realize in my late teens, in experiencing all the cultural confusion and the bullying, and then in my early 20s into my early 30s, how deeply I was struggling. And over time, all I knew is there was a constant flutter in me around feeling unhappy and just feeling unwell and like not being my best, in tandem with sensing this deep spark and fire burning in me. And I'm sure you've already picked up, I'm a pretty sparky human being, everyone. And so there's a lot of spark. So I felt the spark in tandem while feeling the smoldering. And it was a struggle. And so this constant tension was inside me. But the beauty of spark versus smolder is The spark will always win out if we feed it and we fuel it. And so that's where my heart went. And I have done literally decades of self-healing work now, like the amount of therapy, self-coaching, journaling, meditating. Brooke, you mentioned earlier, yes, I went to India and studied yoga, became a yoga teacher, mindfulness teacher years and years ago. The inclusion empowerment work I do is driven by my own personal desire, like inside of me, my soul, my spirit, it's making me emotional, saying that, Ritu, you deserve better. Like, you deserve better. That what is happening around you is not your fault and it's unjust and you deserve better. And so I kept feeding that. And I am now in a place, like in my late 40s, years and years later, where I finally feel beautiful both inside and out. I mean, I have good days and bad days, like all of us. But I would say on a whole, I stand in my power. I'm anchored. I'm values driven. Like, I know who I am. I know what I'm about. Good shit swirls around me. Bad shit swirls around me. I'm like cranky batch on most days, overwhelmed all the time. But it doesn't matter because I'm still anchored and rooted in who I am. And that means that I was able to undo a lot of the social conditioning that came my way. That was a choice. Now, I can also tell you in my DEI work, my diversity, equity, inclusion work, but I can tell you in my work with leaders, because I have direct experience coaching and working with senior people, those people, those leaders who want to do better and shift their behavior do. I use psychometric testing tools to assess people's cultural competence growth. In other words, are you becoming more inclusive in how you can lead? And people do move along the continuum because of choice. The one thing I will also add here, and I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of We've Got This, my book on belonging, is that for me, one of the greatest drivers for shifting our behavior as it relates to how we treat others is empathy. When we understand people's stories, when we understand the people around us are hurting, they carry pain inside themselves as well, that they're on their own journeys, which are often deeply rooted in struggle. And when we learn about what happened to them and why it happened and the impact that it has had, it often will ignite within us a deep commitment to caring and doing better. So I think empathy is profound. And the very last thing I'll say is that we can only have empathy for others if we have empathy for ourselves, because how we treat ourselves is how we treat others, which means, and this is probably one of the biggest findings I've had through my work in the leadership, empowerment, inclusion space, is that when we hate on others, it's because we lack self-love. But the reason why we often lack self-love is because people hate on us. So it goes back to the place we started, the social conditioning, which is why the most important thing we can do in life, the absolute most important thing we can do in life, the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the gift of self-love. Because when we truly know, embrace, and be who we are, and we are rooted and anchored, we're values-driven, we are less likely to hate on others. And we're more likely to exercise empathy.
No, that's so very good. I think you've got a great question on belonging.
Yeah, I've got actually quite a few questions that came up now. I think the one I want to start with before we unpack this thing around belonging, and I know that that is so much of what your next book is about. You know, you talked about bullying. Can you share with us a bit about what that experience was like? And I think it's important because bullying is such a common thread and theme of all ages. You see it from schools to workplace. I recently had experience in a workplace, right? So I would love if you can share with us, you know, what was that experience like and how is it that you took that experience to create where you're at today?
So let me start by saying, first of all, I've been a speaker in some shape or form now for over, like I'd say 25 years. And I only really started talking about my experiences with bullying openly, I think it was like 7 years ago. I had never talked openly about being bullied as a child, and it was rooted in shame. I was just so ashamed that it had happened to me. And also, I've been studying trauma quite a bit over the last several years because of my own experiences with trauma, but also for a lot of us, in what gets in our way is trauma. Like we hold trauma in our bodies. It prevents us from healing and living our best. And so much of what we've already talked about touches back on trauma. And I think that part of my struggle to name the profoundly adverse impact that bullying had on me is also rooted in trauma. It was so horrible that my body didn't acknowledge it. I was frozen in being able to access the memories and the experiences. And in writing We've Got This and talking about digging deep into belonging, it pushed me, it forced me to actually open that door again over the last 2 years. And I can't believe that I'm accessing memories and experiences that I have never talked about or shared. And in the book, I've named certain things, but I don't actually dig deep into it as much because I'm still on my journey. But what I can tell you is this. So my parents immigrated early 70s, very white Canadian, Toronto at the time. We are from India. We're Punjabi by culture, so from North India, and we are Sikh by faith. And when I say Sikh, oftentimes people call us Sikh, call our faith as Sikhism or Sikhi. It's actually decolonizing language in our spirit of being inclusive. It's actually pronounced Sikh and Sikhi or Sikhism. So I am a Sikh. My father wears a turban, has a beard, the full deal. He's a big strapping lad. He is 6'4" with a turban, probably because it adds a few inches. Wears a bright red one. Anywho, they stuck out. And so they had their own experiences with racist bullying, harassment when they arrived in Canada. Myself, my siblings, we were born in Toronto in the inner city, very working class. I have a quintessential immigrant family story. My parents came, very little money. They worked really hard, working class, very multicultural, diverse neighborhood, new immigrants. And when I was around the age of 11, my parents made the very strategic decision to move us to the whitest place they can move us to without moving us into farmland. So they just moved us to a suburb north of the city. And it was an extremely affluent neighborhood that they moved us to, very homogeneous, pretty much white, entirely white WASP. And they did it because they wanted us to access social networks they didn't have as new immigrants. They wanted us to get better education, and they wanted us to learn how to shift cultural codes. As brown kids growing up in white Canadiana, they knew it would be important for us to learn to shift codes. And all of that happened, and I deeply believe I wouldn't be here podcasting with you had that not happened. However, the downside is that I was one of a handful of kids of color in my new school and schools. And I experienced relentless bullying because I looked so different. I had a long braid well past my bottom. I didn't have fancy clothes like everyone else around me. I brought chicken curry and rice to school in little thermos containers. And back then that was not a cool thing. Now it'd be so cool that you did that. Your parents are so cool. It was ew, why are you smell like tarka, which is the foundational cooking base of Indian dishes. Anyways, so I was tormented by bullying and racist childhood bullying at that. And it was an orchestrated effort. There was a club, the I Hate Ritu Club, and it went on for years. And the problem is that it was my private hell because I didn't talk about it with anyone. I didn't take it home. I didn't talk to my parents about it because they had their own battles going on. And then I had my own battle going on with them in the household because of the cultural confusion. And basically, I just buried it for years. But the problem is it basically destroyed my ability to love myself. Between that and the cultural confusion, I learned to equip myself with what I call PPA, which is armor, PPA armor, positivity, perfection, achievement armor. So I was positive all the time, shiny, happy, sparkly. I did everything perfectly, and I was achieve. and I used this as an armor, my PPA armor, then you couldn't see my hurt and pain. And it wasn't like I was doing this consciously. It was a trauma response. It was an unconscious way of shielding myself from hate, except that it's a house of cards because it wasn't addressing the hurt and pain within me. But again, even though I was hurting and I had the pain, I also had the spark. And the spark was there. And this is what I'm saying when I realized, wow, like this dual tension is happening. Let me feed the spark. I knew I had the wherewithal that I should feed that. That's what ultimately led me in my 20s to really dig deep into starting to do the healing work and undo the pain that came along with the bullying and the cultural confusion. I will say it's a lifelong journey. I expect that my journey to deeply feel belonging for myself and with others will be lifelong. I feel great where I am, but I know I have work to do because I often talk about online that relationships are the mirrors of the work that we need to do. And I often see in my relationships how I still struggle to belong. It's even as 50 approaches, I'm like, wow. And Ritu Bhasin, you do all this work and you're teaching others. And what the F? How are you still only taking crumbs in relationships? And the taking crumbs, accepting crumbs when I deserve the whole fucking pie is happening because I'm like me, just like me, please like me. And that please like me comes from the little Ritu where it was like, who hid behind the portables during recesses to protect yourself from harm. It's lifelong work, yo. That's all I gotta say. But it's so rewarding.
So I want to now unpack belonging because, in full transparency, I'm going to go and Google what belonging means. So the Cambridge Dictionary of Belonging says it's really a feeling of being happy or comfortable as part of a particular group and having a good relationship with other members of the group because they welcome you and they accept you. And so I was kind of like, I said to Ricky, I thought, okay, well, what does belonging mean for you? And we had this debate. It's like, what is our relationship to belonging? Is it that we fit in? Is it that, I have a voice? Is it a seat at the table? Is it inclusive environment? And so that coupled with the definition, and I'm hoping this is where you can help us, what showed up was that when you belong, don't you by virtue somewhat lose your authentic self because you are seeking out to belong to something or, maybe to fit in? Or on the other side of it, is it that maybe you are exclusively seeking out, and not you, but as human beings, you generically speaking, that you seek out environments that align with your authentic self in order to belong? So I would love your take on this because we kind of dealt with this. We're like, gosh, what does this mean? And what does belonging actually mean? And how do you actually belong? How do you create that for yourself?
So first of all, I love this discourse that you both had. So kudos to you both because I love this. I want us going forward in our society and in this moment in time when we're struggling globally on so many fronts. Yes, we're flourishing globally on so many fronts as well. Like this is both a beautiful time and a really hard time for us. On the hard part, I want us to deeply understand belonging and for ourselves, for others, work really effing hard to cultivate belonging as a path, as a tool, as a strategy for shifting how we treat the earth, we treat ourselves, we treat others, how we heal, because I think it is truly that powerful. So first of all, let me start with my definition of belonging. I define belonging as the profound feeling, so something we hold inside ourselves. I define belonging as the profound feeling of being accepted for who we are, for our authenticity, by our own self, and by the people we choose to be bonded with. Belonging is about authenticity, which means that to unlock belonging, we have to know, embrace, and be who we are. But this has to happen first and foremost with ourselves. We need to experience belonging with ourselves. We need to belong to ourselves. And so this has to happen deep within us because this is what will empower us to claim belonging with others. So it's a self-experience first and foremost. And belonging with others can never happen at the expense of who we are. In other words, it only happens when others accept us for our true selves, and especially what makes us different and unique. So belonging is about having, as it relates to the collective experience, is about being part of relationships and communities of people who accept us for our authenticity. And so in this regard, belonging and authenticity go hand in hand. When we are more authentic with ourselves and others, this is when we'll experience the greatest amount of belonging. In experiencing great belonging, this is how we continue to unlock our authenticity. So they go hand in hand. Authenticity and belonging go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So let me pause. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think it takes me to the next conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, it's got so many facets for me because, I've been in a corporate world and, it became this buzzword. It's a bit like ESG, people
Totally
throw it out left, right, and center, but they don't really understand what they're talking about. And so for me, I boiled diversity and inclusion down to the one's actually a verb and the other one's an outcome. For me, inclusion is work to be done to include others. And that's what, as a leader, as a co-worker, you create a safe space for others to be who they are so that they can show up as the person that they are authentically. And then diversity is the outcome. So it's not just diversity of, gender, and race, but also diversity of ideas and thoughts. And that's where the performance comes from. I think that's what a lot of people miss, is that diversity, equity, inclusion it's the right thing to do, but it's also about performance. And I think we need so much more of that diverse ideas and thoughts to be thrown into the mix when we have dialogues than when we want to solve issues, as opposed to people that are just saying yes, yes, yes to the person standing up and that speaks the loudest. So that's my humble take on diversity and having experienced that in a corporate world for many, many years. How do you see that? Is that far off the mark?
A lot of what you have shared deeply resonates with me as well. Let me define first. Diversity is about the quantitative representation of difference. It's about the mix of people we have in our midst. And are we truly reflecting the communities that we're serving and we're pulling from as it relates to where we're hiring? Inclusion is about the extent to which people can bring their whole, true, authentic selves to work and still have equal access to opportunity. So it goes back to what you were saying here around people being able to feel safe to be who they are and share their ideas and opinions so that it can drive performance in addition to being the right thing to do. And equity is about recognizing the systemic barriers that exist within our organizational cultures that are rooted in historical legacies. For example, women are not people under the law, racial stratification, and more. And then current realities around forms of bias and prejudice that keep people from communities that experience heightened oppression back, that where we fall through the cracks or the doors are not even open. First and foremost, we must work on equity. Why? Because those barriers are preventing us from unlocking excellence in our midst. Equity isn't about favoritism or giving people more, and it isn't about incompetence, elevating incompetence or lowering our bar. It's about recognizing that the playing field isn't level. We don't start with a level playing field because of these historical legacies around men being better than women and people from the trans community, or white people being better than people of color and people who are indigenous. I could go on and on. And so it's about recognizing how these historical legacies and social conditioning, oh my goodness, so much talk on social conditioning. Social conditioning has caused us both consciously and unconsciously to believe that some people are better than others. And so we need equity to address these systemic challenges, to level the playing field. And sometimes we need to do things differently, do more, do extra to level the playing field. And so equity is critical. And the reason why it's critical is as long as we have inequities embedded in our systems, it will erode at people's ability to be who they are. People will feel unsafe to share and to speak and to give their opinions, to disagree. And we know that innovation and creativity is not born out of same. In fact, when I was doing my MBA, I remember sharing that the land of same is where innovation and creativity goes to die. It's like groupthink is born out of same. And so this is why, and let's bring in the D, diversity matters. We need people from across cultures, genders, ages, geographies, personality types, learning types, neurodiversity. We need people from a range of backgrounds sitting at decision-making tables in order to drive innovation and creativity. But people will not, first of all, we won't be able to have diversity at decision-making conversations if we don't eliminate systemic barriers, equity, because then we just hire and advance the same people, same. But also hiring a bunch of women and people of color, for example, and people who have lived experience with mental health challenges, for example, doesn't make you inclusive. And this is where it's not just about diversity of thought. It's about diversity and inclusion of thought, diversity, equity, and inclusion of thought. Inclusion is about people sitting at a table feeling safe to share who they are and to speak and to dissent, to disagree without the fear of retribution, which is essentially what psychological safety is about as well. And so when you actually start digging deeper and deeper into what I'm sharing from a leadership perspective, and this is why, for me, DEI is not just a side topic that you schedule on your board agenda or your LT, your leadership team agenda for 30 minutes. It's like everything we do is rooted in inclusion and equity principles. Why? Psychological safety intersects with inclusion and equity. If you don't feel safe to share without the fear of retribution, you're striking it in inclusion, equity, and inclusion and equity leads to heightened psychological safety, trust, belonging, empowerment, engagement, productivity, bottom line, in addition to the right thing to do. And in fact, for me as a social justice warrior princess, I will always start with it is the right thing to do, because inclusion is about humanity. It is about honoring ourselves and honoring others. And it is about being good and doing good and right in the world. And that is my anchor. That is my values-based way of living. And so that is the ship that I sail on. And then all the other stuff flows from that. So to me, it's the leaders who get this are the ones that are soaring. The leaders who do not get this will be left behind, are already left behind. And the leaders who say they get this but aren't showing that they deeply get it are being called out. We're finally in a place now where I think the tide, there's more imperative. The imperative is being felt around why we need to shift. To me, really digging deep on the inclusion and equity piece matter, because you're right, diversity will flow from that. The mothership is equity and inclusion. Diversity flows from that.
Yeah, it's micro level, it's organizational level, and I agree with your distinction as well. It's yourself as well. You know, you need to be someone who bestows dignity on others and wants to has the empathy to include others. And that's what I look for in a leader is a person that is willing to do that. And when I say leader, this in an organization is so important. It's co-workers as well. Every single individual in the company is accountable for this. And it's so easy to point to, oh, the leader, the CEO or the COO, they need to drive this. Every single person in a business needs to drive that.
Oh, absolutely. I often will say when I'm doing leadership learning sessions that when we talk about creating cultural change within the organization, like wanting to shift our organizational culture, we'll look into the sky and be like, change organizational culture, change. Like it's like an organism in the sky, without recognizing that actually the organizational culture is every single person within the company, within the organization, owning and shifting their behavior. Of course, because of power of privilege, leaders always will have heightened responsibility And they must go first because they must model the behavior of change, because everyone's looking at leader going, leader, how are you behaving? Because how leader behaves is how everyone else will behave. So leader must go first. However, we all must own our change. It is not easy to lead on a whole. It is hard to be inclusive. It is hard to be a leader when we are first learning to do this well. But then we become unconsciously competent at it. Like we create neural circuitry in our brain and we're wired to do this, and the conditioning makes us do this effortlessly. But I can tell you, as someone who teaches leadership for a living, who teaches inclusion and empowerment for a living, and has a team at my consulting firm, I, as a leader, struggle all the time to be a really good leader, because excellent leadership is really effing hard work. But as we know, and it's like, and as a leader, when we show up and we take the time and do the hard work to really lead with intentionality and empathy, and are deeply committed to creating psychologically safe cultures rooted in trust and inclusion and belonging, we have far better relationships with our team members that are loyal to us. We feel good. Like, it feels like working with friends. That's when the magic happens. And so, but I'd be the first to tell you, it's hard. I find it hard. And I teach this shit for a living. And I'm telling you, I think it's hard.
Ritu, if you could just share with us, you obviously have your book coming out in June, I believe. What's next? You know, you're constantly deepening yourself. You're deepening the work that you're doing. You're expanding it. What's next?
I am on a mission to spread the message about the beauty of belonging throughout the world. I want people to eat up the message that holding that profound feeling of being accepted for who you are will unlock for you life joy. It will give you wind for your sails. It will help you to stand in your power so that you can live your best life, both personally and professionally. And so I care about this on the individual level. I care about it for leaders recognizing that creating workplace cultures that are rooted in belonging leads to all of the things that we have talked about. And then societally as well, I think that, like, our society is both flourishing, as I mentioned, in many ways, but we're hurting. And we're trying to right the wrongs of the past. And to me, being deeply committed to self-love, which is what belonging is about, belonging to ourselves, being deeply rooted and committed to self-love will help us to honor ourselves in a more respectful way and give ourselves the gift of feeling seen and being seen. It'll help us to honor others. It'll help us to honor the planet and how we treat the earth. It'll help us to honor how we treat the legacy of what we're leaving for our children and for future generations. There's just so much that can come from belonging. And so that's my mission. And I'm on a mission. Like, I'm talking about it on Instagram. It's on my website. Anytime I'm invited to speak, I'm like, here, I got to tell you about belonging, because I don't think we've ever thought of it in this way. And so to me, this is a way of life or a philosophy or belief, a pathway that we've not considered in this way before. It's kind of like when Brene Brown took the world by storm by talking about vulnerability and shame. She blew open the world and she blew open my life. And I want belonging to do the same for others.
Thank you again to Ritu Bhasin, and thank you to all of you who have listened in on today's episode. I have to say, I had not met Ritu leading up to the conversation. And you know, when you just meet somebody for the first time and there's this instant connection and synergy, and you just feel like you're in this safe space where you can challenge somebody in the conversation and you can create with somebody in the conversation, and there's no pretenses or biases or judgments. You know, that was Rickis and I's experience in our conversation with Ritu. She did actually create this safe space where you just felt like you could belong. And I know that is what she's on a mission to do. I am going to be including in the show notes a summary of the entire conversation. You'll also be able to see where to follow Ritu's journey and how to get in contact with Ritu. I know that she's regularly jumping into her DMs to converse with people. So if you have questions, please reach out to her. And I'm also going to include in the notes a direct link where you can pre-order your copy of her latest book, which you guys, I highly recommend. It is called We Got This: Unlocking the Beauty of Belonging. This is going to be hitting shelves in June. But if you pre-order the book, I know that Ritu's throwing in additional bonus resources for you, one of which is going to include a free event to We Got This with Ritu, which is an exclusive virtual event that she'll be hosting in July. You don't want to miss it. So get out there, pre-order your copy of her book before it hits shelves. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did today with Ritu. And if you did, please leave us a review because that is how we grow. But we also love to hear from you. We love your feedback. We love knowing which guests you want to see featured so that you can get the most out of every single episode. And honestly, I think one of the best things about podcasting for both Rickus and I is that it has allowed us to connect with so many new people across so many different platforms and so many different parts of the world who are sharing their stories and experiences based on one of the episodes that they heard of the Take Two podcast. So we'd love to hear from you. Our contact details are also in the show notes. And please tune in every second Tuesday for the latest episode of the Take Two podcast. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time.